Hi everybody, my name is Sunny Panu on the Minimum Gold YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. We have another special guest with us today, Mr. Jeff Desjardins of the visualcapitalist.com. Jeff, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it was about a year since we last sat down and had a talk.
That's correct, yes. The last time we spoke was at the Silver Summit, and we discussed some very interesting things back then. But one infographic you've done of late has got a lot of people's attention. Actually, you know, we've been seeing a lot of the countries worldwide printing money, quantitative easing programs, and debt has been the main topic of discussion. And you did an infographic of recent, which talked about the world debt in one visualization. And basically, it was $60 trillion of debt that you calculated between amongst all the countries worldwide. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was, you know, what was the premise for creating this this particular infographic on total worldwide debt?
Yeah, so I mean, over time, especially since the financial crisis, countries have been in a pretty tight spot, and you know, the economy is doing okay from some angles, but at a lot of other angles, it's not. And so a lot of these countries have been forced to continue borrowing. Obviously, there's been several different quantitative easing programs. Interest rates have dropped down to zero to help governments maintain this debt.
Right.
And so basically, you know, we want to see, you know, what is the sort of total liability that that the world faces. And it's not as if, you know, we have to pay this 60 trillion tomorrow or anything like that.
Right.
And at the same time, it's not only the 60 trillion isn't the only debt. That's just the sovereign national debt. That doesn't include state or municipal or consumer debt or corporate debt. So this is just sort of the first level of what countries are. It's very, you know, it's one of the easier to calculate aspects of it. But once you go into all these other levels, then it starts to get sort of even more intense. But but no, we thought we would just look at the sovereign national level and see, in terms of public debt, you know, who owes the most, and in terms of a pie, what does that look like?
Yeah, and the $60 trillion number, I mean, have we ever faced this kind of debt historically, or I mean, what was your...
So there's a few different ways to look at this. As a absolute number, we have never faced this amount historically. If you look at it in relation to GDP, which is the way that a lot of people look at debt, how much you owe versus how much you produce.
Right.
That way, it's never been that large historically.
Right.
And if you look at it with regards to the amount of potential revenue that you have coming in, and from that angle, it's also never been that large historically. So it's a very large amount, just because since the financial crisis, you know, we've just kept on this path, and central banks are sort of walking a bit of a fine line of trying to get the economies going the way that they want, and trying to get inflation at a certain level. So as that has all gone on, we've gotten to the point that we're at now, and that's what our graphic depicts.
Country specific though, you know, you're seeing a lot of talk, you know, over the last several months, you know, several countries in a debt situation, specifically Greece, getting a lot of media attention.
Yeah, Puerto Rico, which is not a country, but it's still you know, an entity that is in the same sort of situation. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And you know, with Greece being in the spotlight, and then we were just talking just previous to our discussion here that you know, you mentioned a couple of other countries that are much more important in terms of our worldwide debt, and just want to go into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, Greece, as we all know, has sort of been at the front line of media coverage over the last you know, 4 or 5 years, ever since the European debt crisis, basically. And I mean, yeah, it's a significant country because it's in the Western world. You know, people know about it. They know about ancient Greece, and they know that's sort of the birthplace of Aristotle and Plato and all these different things. So you know, they sympathize with it, and they get it, right? It's not it doesn't seem foreign to people, and so that's why one reason why we talk about it a lot. Now, obviously, it's also part of the EU as well.
Right.
So from that angle, that's why it gets a lot of coverage. But at the same time, it's a small country in terms of population and in terms of overall economic output, and so from that angle, because we've known it's been in this situation for a very long time, obviously a lot of the banks and the other countries and stuff have been trying to limit their exposure to it. So, you know, if Greece truly hit new levels of crisis even above of what they're at right now. Would it make a tremendous impact? It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
There is some contagion there, but it's hard to say. However, when you look at other countries, there are some that are really up there that are worth noting. And countries like Spain and Italy, which are major countries, they're countries with significant amounts of population.
Yeah, I'll just mention the number here.
Sure.
Italy was 4.6%, and then you had Spain at 2.15%. So,
Right.
Especially in the Eurozone there. So yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
And these are both countries that have, they also have unsustainable levels of debt as well.
Right, yeah.
So the real question to me is, if we've created this much of a kerfuffle about what happens to a country that has 0.4% of the world's debt, what happens when you have 4% of the world's debt in jeopardy?
Right.
That's 10 times as much.
Right, exactly.
So it's going to be 10 times as big of an issue if they run into similar issues. To me, that's the more interesting question. And there's also some other interesting observations that you can make when you look at this pie as the way that we created it, which is one, we grouped it by continent, so you can sort of see the impact of each continent. So North America, the United States, the European Union, and Japan. If you combine all of their debts together, it makes up over 75% of the global world debt.
Unbelievable.
Just three. EU's not really it's a union, but these three important areas.
Yeah. Well, Japan has been on just a very aggressive quantitative easing program for several years, and actually they just announced some additional programs to keep the economy going, right?
Yeah.
So.
And Japan's global production is equal to only about 6% of the world's production, like in terms of GDP.
Right.
Yet they have 20% of the world's debt as an absolute figure. So theirs is an interesting scenario because their citizens own a lot of their debt, and so it's a little bit different than when you have all these other countries and banks exposed to it.
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely an interesting situation as well.
Well, you know what? I guess the key question going forward now. Okay, you created this infographic now based on the world at its present state. Now, do you think that the worldwide debt would increase or decrease going forward? And based on those factors, how does the distribution of the pie look, or could look?
Yeah. So, when you look at everything right now, obviously, as we were filming this, over the last couple of weeks, there's been extreme market volatility. As China's economy is slowing down, and people are worried about that. There's still a lot of issues in Europe.
Right.
And so it's hard to say if things are going to ultimately continue on this path. Hopefully things get better. But the way things are going right now, it's even looking to me like the Fed isn't going to hike their rates in September, and we're going to sort of continue on the same path. There's already talk about more QE so that they're expecting some deflation in Europe right now and in Asia, and so these are all issues that they're grappling with, and the only way to get out of that is to continue to print and borrow and try and stimulate things in the central bank's opinion anyways.
Right.
And so they're going to continue on that path. And this sort of relates back to one thing that we're going to be putting out shortly, which is from a country's budgetary standpoint, the way that you borrow is you run a deficit, right? So you have a certain amount of income or revenue come in from taxes, and then you spend a certain amount on various government programs and stuff, and the difference between those is the deficit or the surplus. So when you're talking about will this overall debt continue to increase, what we've looked at in our next graphic that we're going to be putting out on in our United Nations of Debt series is how often over the last, since the financial crisis, how often have countries run deficits versus how often have they run surpluses? And the answer to that question is one that is probably not a sustainable answer and would lead to, if it continues on that trend, we're looking at a bigger pie of that debt in the future.
Interesting. Wow.
But I'll leave that for when we release the next infographic through our site.
So in this particular infographic that's coming up, can you just give more detail on the variables that were used and what they would look forward to then?
Sure. So basically what we looked at is particularly we looked at the G7 nations. So this is the in theory, the 7 richest nations in the world
Okay.
that have the most economic influence.
Interesting.
And you know, those are the countries that, if they're the richest nations in the world, they should be able to at least break even on their budget, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In theory.
You would think so, yeah.
You would think so?
Yeah. And this is, I
United
guess,
Nations of Debt. Yes.
United Nations of Debt, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is part of your United Nations of Debt infographic series, and this will come out in the next 2 weeks, in addition to this infographic that you already did, and this
Yeah.
is kind of an update. Interesting,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and we also have another one that is eventually going to come out here as well, which sort of looks at it from a bit of a different standpoint. So when you look at debt, a lot of the time people look at it in terms of debt to GDP. So
Yeah.
if you think of it in terms of a family, that what the debt to GDP is, you're looking at is GDP is sort of like your overall contribution or
Right.
your wages or whatever, and then debt is sort of what's on your credit card balance or your
Right.
all this
Yeah.
kind of thing. But that's not what your total make. It doesn't really it doesn't really affect how much you have to actually pay it off, because that's in the country analogy, that's looking at the overall production. Like, so
Right.
if your GDP is $2 trillion, you can't pay that towards the
Right.
debt, right?
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you can pay is the actual tax revenue that
Right.
you get in, right?
Right.
And so what we've looked at in this graphic instead is, instead of looking at debt to GDP, we look at debt to revenue. So the amount of actual revenue that a country generates from its taxpayers, how long would it take to pay off this debt?
Right.
And it kind of paints a little bit of a different picture of everything than the GDP does, which makes it very interesting.
Interesting. Well, thanks a lot, Jeffrey, for being on our channel today. Very interesting insight into the worldwide debt situation, and with this infographic that's coming up. Jeff, for being on the program, and we'll see you next time. If you want to get more information on Visual Capitalist, please visit visualcapitalist.com, and you can ask Jeff any questions directly. And you also have a Twitter as well, right?
Yep, Visual Cap on Twitter, or / Visual Capitalist on Facebook.
Okay.
And we're on LinkedIn and that kind of stuff as well. So
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
thanks.